Hey there, guys, and welcome to this month's Thriller of the Month. So, my Thriller of the Month is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This is a story that follows a housewife called Patricia Campbell who joins a book club with a group of her friends, and they discuss more of the darker type of books, such as thrillers, mysteries, serial killer type books. And then a handsome new stranger appears in town, and whilst Patricia is initially attracted to him, she starts suspecting that he is not all that nice when a group of children go missing in the town. Suddenly, the book club then take it upon themselves to rid the town of this man, suspecting him to be a Ted Bundy type killer, of a killer hiding in plain sight. But what they discover is actually a lot more terrifying. I really enjoyed this book. This was my first Grady Hendrix book, and I kind of expected it to be a really dark horror, very graphic, um, because it is actually a book chosen by my friend Lauren from Lauren's Library, and she loves Grady Hendrix and she loves horror books. So I kind of expected that. What I found was actually, I felt it was more thriller than horror. It was, for me, a thriller with horror elements. It had a lot of the horror suspense. It had a lot of the graphic scenes that you would come to expect from a horror. But for the most part, I found it to be very much a thriller with parts of horror, which I really enjoyed because I'm not a big horror reader. I wasn't. I've started doing it much more recently, but it's a nice way in. There is a lot of parts where I think, as a thriller reader and not a horror reader, I could really get into this story, and it made it so much easier for me to enjoy the story a lot more without constantly being on guard for some of these more horror type elements. I really loved the suspense. I felt as though it built up very slowly. I was initially concerned that it was going to be a bit too slow because I don't think any action started in the book until around about page 50. Before that, it was just very dull in a sense. But I enjoyed it. It was nice and slow. It was fun. I feel as though if it carried on and went past the page 50 mark, I would have gotten bored, but it didn't. From page 50 onwards, the action started, and when it did, oh, we got some good action. One of the things I absolutely adored about this book was the horror elements of it. There are a few scenes that were very graphic horror that terrified me. I think of one scene in particular. I won't mention what the scene is. I won't spoil anything. I want people to go into this without any information, because when they get to these scenes, it'll make it a lot more terrifying. Um, but there was one scene in particular that absolutely terrified me. I felt nervous and twitchy, and I felt as though there was always something on me, and it was horrible. I hated it, but it was also the part that sticks out in my mind about the book most. I always remember that. And as the story progresses, we find out that some children in the town are going missing, and it's very sad to see. And that was another thing that I really enjoyed because it portrayed that so well. Some of these children that are going missing are from more poorer, less well off areas, and as our main character is from the more affluent side of town, you get to see her caring about it, but people around her don't seem to care because it doesn't directly affect them. And also, in a sense, we see our main character just kind of brush it off and say, yeah, it's not my problem, I need to ignore it. But you also get to see the other end of the spectrum where the people who are going missing and dying under very dark circumstances. And as this goes on, you get to see the impact that is having on people throughout the entire town. One of the things I wasn't the biggest fan of was kind of some point in the story. I won't say when, I won't say what's, but some point in the story there is a bit of a time jump, and I don't really like time jumps. I feel as though it takes me out of the narrative, because it just kind of, it feels like a different story altogether when there's a time jump. because you then have to explain what these characters have been doing in that time, what's been changed, what's the same. And I've never been a fan of a time jump, and that was the one thing that kind of knocked me off. I feel as though there were points where the story was at really, really high moments, and also points where not that much happened, but because of these moments being so dramatic and tense, it was also quite low. But at the same time, as someone who is not used to much horror and enjoys reading more of a thriller, having these highs and lows really complemented each other really well. And I just loved the story overall. I felt as though the characters initially weren't that developed, but as the story went on, I realised that I knew each of these characters so individually. I could tell who was talking before I read it. I could tell what the characters were going to do or say and how they were going to act before they did, because I just knew what these characters were like. And that was really, really good. I love that storytelling, and I love that ability to write characters in such a way where your readers know what to expect and know what they're going to say, because they just know them so well. It really does immerse you in the story as a reader to know these characters and understand. One of the things I really loved was the portrayal of this mysterious stranger, James, who comes into the town. I feel as though he did such a good job, like it's a movie review. I feel as though the character was just so well written, because you got to see the smarminess, you got to see how easily he manipulated people. He manipulated children, he manipulated women, he manipulated the husbands of said women, and you got to see him insert himself into the lives of these characters. And because you kind of know what he is and who he is, that makes it terrifying, because you're waiting for the other characters to see. You're waiting for him as a character to snap and reveal himself. And it built up so much tenseness, that's not a word. It built up a level of tension that I really enjoyed, because I was reading this book thinking, I don't trust him. Everything he's saying, it's almost like a very veiled threat. When he's complimenting characters, you're like, oh no, are you complimenting them because you like them? Are you complimenting them because you want something from them? Are you complimenting them because you think they look like a tasty dish that you fancy having for a bit of supper? We don't know. But it was tense, it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed the drama. Overall, I really feel as though it has a lot of horror elements that were really good. They weren't too overdone. They didn't happen throughout the entire thing. They just happened in bits and parts. And that was nice, because I didn't feel bogged down with a lot of horror as a person who does not read too much horror. And the parts that were more, maybe a bit slower, more dull, I didn't mind them as such, because I found that the writing style was so easy to read. It was just easy to flick through. Like I mentioned earlier, at the start we had about 50 pages of nothing before the main plot kind of kicked off. But I didn't mind, because I read those 50 pages really quickly. And it was one of the things that I could compliment this book on throughout, and it never faltered. It was always an easy read, and I really, really enjoyed that. But that is it from me, guys. I have nothing else to say. I would definitely recommend this book. It is really interesting and fun. I will leave a link below to where you can purchase it off Amazon and Waterstones. And until next time, guys, I will see you later.
SafeMusicList.com. Royalty-free music for marketing and promotional videos.